Hello, first-time coders. The objective of today's lab is to explore if-else statements. An if-else statement is like a building with two doors in which VIPs are allowed to enter through a certain door while everyone else goes through the other. Suppose we write a program that checks for numbers that are perfect squares. When the user gives us an input of, let's say, 9, the if condition will be true, we will be allowed to pass, and the message a number is perfect square will be printed, and the program will continue. However, if the user gives us an input that is not a perfect square, for example 2, the program has no option but to go to the else part and print that the number is not perfect and exit the segment. So let's try our hands on some examples. Let's write a code for a student management system. The system takes the mark of the students and decide whether the student has passed or failed. So the student is considered to pass if he gets anything greater than or equal to 40 marks. And he is considered to fail if he gets anything less than 40. So that means let's write the code. Well, the first thing, we get the mark. So mark is equal to marks are considered floating points, since you can get 4.5, 4.25, and so on and so forth. Enter the student mark, the student's mark. Okay, then we check the mark. If the mark is greater than or equal to 40, then we consider the student among those who passed. So otherwise we consider him has failed. So let's try the code. Now if we run the code and we give the code let's say 90, so we can see that the student has passed. So if we try something like 10, we can see that the student has failed. Let's try something like 39.9999. The student has failed. So what we need to watch out for is, whenever you are writing an if statement, the if part contains the condition. Apart from that, you must end the if with a colon, and you must end the else with a colon. The colon lets Python know that you have finished your code. Whatever is inside the if part of the block should be shifted by a tab or at least a space. Tab is much better because it's more conspicuous. So the space tells Python that indeed whatever you have written is inside the if statement. Same goes for the else part. The space tells Python that this is part of the else part. However, you should note that the else and the if are on the same line. This means that this else belongs to this if statement, and whenever you start writing in this line, then whatever you write does not belong to the if statement, the if-else block. Now suppose we want to write a more precise code. In this case, let's say that we want to classify the students into A students, B students, C students, D students, and F students. Let's assume any student with less than 40 is an F student. Any student with anything greater than 40 but less than 50 is a D student. Let's assume any student with anything greater than 50 but less than 70 is a C student, and any student with less than 70 but greater than 70 but less than 90 is a B student, and any student with anything greater than 90 and less than or equal to 100 is an A student. So since we have several conditions, in this case we need an if-elif statement. In this case, if you look at the structure here, what we have is we have like a road which vents into if or the else part, right? Or the else part. Of course, whether it likes or not, it must pass through the else part. There is no circumventing the else. So it's either you go through the if or you must go through the else and then continue with the remaining code. In this case, we have several ways we can go. So it's more than one option. So in this case, we can have something like this. And this can be done with an if-else-if statement. So let's try our hands on it. Okay, so we can have marks equal to float input enter student's mark. So now we have the student's mark. What else can we do? We can say, all right, note that I'm using this apostrophe here because I use quotes out, so it's safe to use apostrophe. But if I'm using quotes here like this, then I must escape the apostrophe inside to allow the computer to print the message. So now we have this, then we can check if our student gets anything between 100 and 90, right? Yeah, between 100 and 90. Let's put this by the side so that we can see the design. Okay, so if you have anything between 90, if A is greater than 90, if marks is greater than 90 and marks is less than or equal to 100, then we print column. Then we print grade is A. Else if, that's why they call it elif, else if it is between 70 marks and 90, print grade is any other thing will be considered as a fail. We can do it this way. So we can just say, okay, if mark is less than 40, and then we can make this elif. So else cannot take condition. And then we can have an else which will help us look for errors. So we can say print mark is not valid for somebody who puts some kind of crazy mark. So let's check it and see. So if we try this, supposing I put like 1000 marks, the computer would take the marks, it will go to let's take this to the other side. So supposing you put 1000. So what the computer would do is it will check this. Now this condition is not true, then it checks the next one. It's not true, it checks the next one. It's not true, it checks again, it's not true. When it comes, then it has no option but to execute the else part and then continue with the remaining code. Okay. Now supposing we put a value of 50, what's going to happen? So if we put 50, the computer would see this is not true, this is not true either, this is not true, but this is true because the mark is equal to 50. So it will enter, execute this part, and then exit the if statements. Note, these other ones will not be executed, neither would be anything above. So let's try it here. So we get D as we have predicted. Okay, now another thing, since we know that our code would enter, if it enters anything at if it enters any section of the if-elif that is true, it will not execute the ones below. So we can take advantage of that. So what we can do is we can remove this part of the code. So what's going to happen? Anytime you put a value, for example, you put 65. So 65 is not greater than 90, so we will not execute line 4. Then we check 65 is not greater than 70. We'll ignore this line. Then we'll go to 65 indeed is greater than 50. So the computer will execute line 8, and then it will exit the if block because it considers the whole if-elif as one block. So let's try this in both cases. If you run 65, we get C. How about here? We get the same answer. So the most important thing you need to watch out for in your code is the spacing. The spacing allows the computer to determine what is part of the if statement and what is not. So always remember to leave this space for your if statements and the column. The column tells the computer that you have finished your code. Also remember that the else does not contain any commands. You can only put conditions in the elif or the if part of the block. And since all these are aligned with the if, the computer considers everything as one if block. Thank you for listening and see you next time.